Hi friends, it's Kayla. This is my February wrap up. I'm sorry it's late. It was a weird reading month for me. I started a lot of things and didn't finish them, and then I spent the last week being like, okay, if you just like wrap up those final 20 pages of all of these books, you can include it in your wrap up and you haven't left any books behind. But then I just couldn't find the motivation to finish any of them. So it's not that like I want to hit a certain amount of books. I'm actually very happy that all of my books this month that I read fit in my little book basket for like the first time. So that has nothing to do with it. I just hate leaving books unfinished if I do plan on finishing them, which I do for like 3 different things that I started in February. Definitely wish me luck in March with getting everything wrapped up. How many books did I read? 11. I want to go back to that thing I used to do where depending on how many stars a book got, I give it that many things. Like I share that many things that I loved about the book. And then like if it got 3 stars, I'd give 2 things that I didn't like about it and try to like justify my rating. Actually, first, I'm not going to do that with the nonfictions that I read because I just have a hard time discussing nonfiction in that way. So let's talk about these 2 books that I read in my Enneagram video, but the Millenniagram, just Millenniagram, the Enneagram Guide for Discovering Your Truest, Baddest Self. This is by Hannah Posch, and I am giving it like 4 stars. I can't think of 4 things that I liked about it. Just like generally the idea of it is great. Maybe I'll try. I give it a star for me being the first Enneagram type described here. I give it a star for color organization. I give it a star for telling like the core idea of what the Enneagram is, describing it and how everything is connected in the wings, but then also putting some personality into it with these fun little pages and the quiz at the beginning and how it was kind of a raw and expletive filled experience. I feel like a lot of Enneagram stuff leans towards a certain type of writing style, and this appeals to me more. But maybe one mark off because it went a little far. I can't recommend this to everyone because it was a little brash at times. It wasn't as inclusive or like safe for some people to read, I'm sure. So 4. Then Biased, Uncovering the Hidden Prejudice That Shapes What We See, Think, and Do by Jennifer L. Eberhardt. I gave 5 stars, but I don't know how to give it like 5 things I like about it. Just like the general, all of it, you know? This author is an expert in her field, and you can tell while you're reading it that she really understands what she's talking about. A lot of the book is talking about policing and over-policing and racial bias and prejudice and like where that comes from, and her training with police officers. There's a whole mix of like her experience and the people that she encounters in her training, the things that they say to her, the things that she teaches people, and then discusses like entire systematic and systemic issues and gives like things that we've all seen in the news, like stories that have happened and takeaways from that. In a lot of ways, this book increased my vocabulary and my ability to speak on certain ideas, which I definitely appreciate. The section on moral credentialing taught me a lot. This is going to be one of my top recommended nonfictions like of all time. The audiobook is amazing, and it was just like a really well balanced, well thought out book. Next, we'll go through some books that I didn't love. So I did an entire reading vlog for these 2 books because I was lucky enough to receive ARCs, and I shared all of my thoughts in there, but I'll wrap it up here as well. A History of What Comes Next by Sylvan Newell is the first book in a sci-fi historical series where it discusses this like family kind of like alien vibes and how their purpose is to help humans throughout history get to space. Unfortunately, I only gave this 2 stars, and I don't plan to continue in the series. I like Sylvan Newell's writing overall. Like I find it easy to follow. I find it well researched, the topics that he covers, and so like I respect it a lot. I guess 1 star would just be for that, like the research portion of it. I love how he talked about, this was like side thing in an article he wrote that discussed and recommended other books that have like World War II and the space race covered, because those 2 things are inexorably linked. Some that I've read and some I definitely want to pick up. So the concept of this is something that I'm interested in. And my 2nd star is like for the audiobook. It's got a full cast. I think it's really well done. Especially at the ending, you get the author's note that I think was great. And then you also get a little like interview with the cast of the audiobook, which is really cool. But the book itself just didn't work for my reading preferences. On one hand, there's like this secondary storyline that is still within like the family and them impacting people and trying to like take them out of in this book specifically the Nazi party and bring them over to like the rocketry program. But outside of that, and like halfway through the book, we get introduced to like another kind of element to the story and something else going on, and I just wish that entire subplot, if you want to call it that, was done completely differently, because I love the concept of it, but I just wish, I wish this was a series of novellas. This could have been 3 different novellas and they could have all tied into the same story, but we could have just gotten a focus on one thing, and then it could have been a little more like fleshed out, the characters. I've always hated the phrase fleshed out, but that is how I feel about all of the characters in this book. I guess that's another like negative star, is I never ever felt like I understood, connected with, like really grasped the characters, which maybe wasn't the goal of the book. So it's not a flaw of the book, it's just why my experience got a 2 star. And then for the project, I actually feel similarly about the writing itself. Like, these are both authors that I enjoy the actual writing, like the sentence structure, like the way things are described. Just a lot of times when I read a book and don't like it, it's because of the writing style. Like, I just didn't vibe with it. But I think that this book was really successful in what it did. I just think that I don't actually like cult books the way that I think that I do. I like the idea of a book about cults because I always think it's a really interesting look at power dynamics. It's really important to expose this type of situation. I think the story was really convincing. So maybe in my reading of stories like this, I am looking for more over-the-top, gimmicky, like twists and turns and shocks and reveals, which isn't conducive to a cult story, nor like should it be. So discussing my feelings on this is absolutely a challenge, but I will give it 2 stars. 1 for, again, how successful I feel like it is, how well researched I think it is, and a 2nd star for the timelines. I always love a book where there's like a mysterious situation, but then we're bouncing back and forth between a couple different characters in a couple different situations, and then they all eventually come together and make sense. So I think the pacing was really good. But 3 things I didn't like about it: I guess the lack of twists and turns, though I don't think that's necessarily fair. Another one would be the distinguishability between characters. If in the middle of a paragraph, if you just like open the book and I read an entire page, I might not have been able to tell you which sister's mind we're in. And I just realized I didn't tell you the plot of this, where there are 2 sisters, one who has gotten involved in this cult and the other sister who is investigating the cult and also getting immersed into it throughout the story. And my last one may just be a me thing, but I do think that this lacked atmosphere. For the setting of this book, I never really got a feel for where we were. I didn't love the scene setups and how we were just like dropped into a bunch of dialogue. I wanted a little more description. With that said, I think it's hard to review books for me because I just feel like I don't make sense a lot of the time, because the next book I'm going to talk about is Where the Crawdads Sing, which I also gave 2 stars. but I have the opposite critique because I think it had way too much atmosphere. When I say I'm bad at reviewing books, this is what I mean. I don't know how to explain how I can hate something in one book and love it in another, but I just think it's maybe about what I go into the book hoping for. So like in a mystery book, I'm hoping to feel like this chilling atmospheric vibe, while reading Where the Crawdads Sing, which is more like a literary historical thing, I maybe want more plot and more, I can't say like more of it character driven because it was really character driven, but I just feel like this could have lost 200 pages of descriptions of the marsh and the nature, which like is such a part of the book. Like the marsh in this book is almost its own character. Though what I'll say about this is it's not a book that I normally would pick up on my own, so maybe I don't even know what I'm looking for in a story like this, because if it was done differently it would be an entirely different genre. So Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens is about a girl who's growing up in the 60s, and it doesn't even say, and her family has left her behind for multiple reasons, and we are jumping in a couple different timelines. One where she is a young girl and she's growing up and just like surviving, and then in another storyline it's kind of a mystery trial situation because a dead body has been found in the marsh and there are all these people like trying to figure out what happened. I don't typically love books that follow a character for their entire lives anyway, though again, like one of the books in this stack does do that and I gave it 5 stars. So what am I talking about? I just didn't want to follow Kaya for that long. I also don't tend to love like epilogues where everything is like wrapped up and perfectly like bullet point kind of describe exactly like where she's at a million years from now. But I did give this 2 stars. I think I might have said 3 stars in my vlog, but 2 stars. One for I did enjoy getting to see Kaya experience love and joy, and that small portion of the book meant a lot to me for what else we were covering throughout the book. I think the synopsis describes 2 young men who become intrigued by her wild beauty. It's not like 2 friends like become obsessed with Kaya. There are 2 like different situations going on, and one of them was just like really beautiful and super important for the narrative. And the second thing I loved was like the trial situation. I wish it was done differently. I wish it was longer. I wish it was introduced earlier, differently. Like I wish a lot of things, but I do enjoy like, what is it called? Like mysteries that involve law or trials or judges or whatever you call that. I love the introduction of that in most books, so that was good. The 3 things I didn't enjoy would be like the atmosphere, because that's just not what I needed to like enjoy the story. 2 would be the lack of, again, like twists and turns, which is not the goal of this book. This is the type of story that if you've read it once, you know what you're getting into. Like this story has been told many different ways before. The pairing between like a mystery and a young woman growing up and experiencing trauma. So I think for people who pick up this type of book, they're looking for maybe a specific feeling that they've gotten before, but it's what makes it different is the setup and the characters and all of that. But for me in reading this type of story, the impact is immediately lost if I can already figure out from page 5 like who got murdered, who murdered them, how we got there, like what the big event that caused the murder was. Like it just followed a certain formula, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think the last thing would be Kaya's character development. I struggled with some of the choices she made and some of the ways that she grew as a person, but more so in the ways that like other characters didn't get the same like attention. That's hard to explain. Let me move on to something I love. The 2 5 stars I gave out this month for fiction were When No One Is Watching and Their Eyes Were Watching God. So When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole is about gentrification. It's set in Brooklyn. We're following a character named Sydney who notices like a lot changing in her neighborhood, and a lot of people who used to live in her neighborhood are leaving, and she gets connected to a neighbor named Theo, and they come together to figure out like where these people have gone and if there's something darker happening. I just did a live show for this yesterday with Zoe and Chanel, which was amazing, and I would recommend you go over and listen. So I'll link that down below and kind of sum up everything that I'm sure I said in the live show. 5 reasons I love this book. The POVs were perfect. This is one of the best dual POVs I've ever read. Just like the structure of this book gets a star because they were so distinct, and also in between there were these little like kind of like internet message board little like inserts, which I love in a book. Another star for the pacing. I know that some people take issue with how this book was like slower for the first like 100 pages. And then like a lot happens really quickly, and I loved that, and I think it's a really interesting reflection of gentrification, and there are a lot of themes that are really cool to like think about and consider, and how the book's actual writing complements the actual storyline. I loved like the character POVs for sure, but I also loved the characters. I think they were really well described. You understood all of their emotions and motivations, and it was just a really strong cast, side characters included. Next is also like writing things, but like the structure again, but specifically in the pairing of certain scenes, I was just like geeking out over, because there's a couple situations that the main character finds herself kind of in multiple times, or we get to see the same scene played out but from a little bit of a different perspective, and I just think it was really smart and really interesting seeing how exactly 100 pages later we would see a scene that went a certain way, and based on like one slight difference it was suddenly so much more dangerous. And lastly, and why like I suck at reviewing, because I didn't like this because it was too predictable, but I love this because it was predictable. I think of One by One by Ruth Ware when I think of this thing I'm about to say, but I have gotten so much more on board with predictable mysteries and thrillers over the last year, and respecting them a lot more than I used to. I still love a gimmick. I still love an over-the-top, nonsensical, unrealistic thriller, but I think I read so many of them for such a long period of time that any book that I could predict even slightly, I was like, well, it can't get a 5 star because I knew where it was going. But with a book like this, where I think you can tell where the story is going, I really appreciate it because it let us process things and let us see Sydney process things. And I just find so much more value than I used to in the actual plotting of a mystery, as opposed to just waiting for like the gotcha moment. I think that it takes a certain type of author, I'm sure, to pull off a book where even if you know where it's going, they add value in that, because it makes for a more impactful read when you can pick up on all the little hints of what's happening, rather than this big moment and then the book's just over. This is my second favorite Literally Dead Book Club book ever, so I'm just like really excited about it. And the other one is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, which follows a woman for a good portion of her life. It's set in the 30s, I believe. I feel like I've done this in 3 different videos. I've been like, when is this set? Oh, it's the 30s. It follows a young woman named Janie through 3 main like relationships in her life, and what she takes away from these relationships and these marriages, and how she just like makes space for herself and discovers like what she wants with her life and how to find happiness and freedom on her own terms. I gave it 5 stars. I said that. 1 is just for that, following a woman discovering like what feminism means to her, I think is always great. 2, the structure with the 3 relationships was really well done because you know what to expect, and I think the book goes by more quickly when there is this established structure. I also love the structure in that like she's telling her own story like to a neighbor, and that makes it really cool. 3, I just love the small town vibes of the story. 4th star for how it covered so many different things, especially like within the small town. Colorism and judgment, and there's religious aspects and slavery and, like I said, feminism, and I just enjoyed how all of those things were clearly evident in how they affected the storytelling and Janie's life experience. And I don't know how to explain my 5th star, but it's just like anytime I read a book where the dialect is unfamiliar or the dialogue is unfamiliar, whether it's like set in the past or it's futuristic or it's like some fantastical way of writing, there's just this sense of payoff for me, and I would really recommend the audiobook because it made getting through it, this is a challenging read, it made it easier to really get into. Next up, this was another challenging read, and I feel like I didn't fully get the same payoff, so I thought it would be good to talk about next. But this is Beloved by Toni Morrison, and it is about a woman named Setha, and it's about a group of people who have escaped enslavement, and it's about a haunted house, and it's ghosty, and I don't know my final rating. This is the kind of book that I would like to read for a second time, and I think it would be probably a higher rating. Right now I'm giving it a 3. I liked that it was ghosty and weird, and I feel like I traditionally love books where I don't fully know what's going on and there are weird elements sprinkled in there. 2, I just love horror books that pair like unrealistic horror with realistic horror. And then this one could go either way, this star. So like if we're giving this like a 2.5, it could be a negative and a positive, because I like books that have metaphor and symbolism, and there was a ton of that in here. And sometimes I got it and sometimes I think it went over my head, so it could go either way. But the symbolism of like freedom and grief and guilt and identity are definitely something that you could think about in regards to this book for a long time after. This is very conducive to like a full classroom discussion, an essay. I understand why this was read in schools, maybe still is read in schools for sure. And then the 2 things I didn't like about it, I just think there were too many POVs and too many characters for me to fully grasp like what the book was doing for most of it. I think it's not that upon reread I would better understand what I read, because I did take my time with this, but I think it's that knowing where it's going will help grasp like the purpose of what's going on in different characters' minds and in different situations. And then overall, the way that the book switches switches styles at a certain point in the book, I just had a really hard time enjoying where the book went at that point. So it was a bit of a struggle overall. This is like a huge prize winning book, so I'm obviously not saying like it's not a good book, because I get it. This is all, we all know, right, that this is very subjective, and I'm probably wrong about many things in my life. And my last 3 are all 4-star reads, so that's pretty cool. Where should we go from here? Let's do Vicious by V.E. Schwab. So this is the story of Victor and Eli. It's like sci-fi fantasy, and they discover how to create EOs or extraordinaries and get like powers. I definitely love gray morality, so the idea that like these characters, do they have good intentions? What are their motivations in life? Is there a bad guy and a good guy? That's definitely 1 star. 2, the cast of characters overall, all of the side characters, amazing. I loved all the storylines. I loved everything. I definitely plan to pick up the sequel, which is rare for me. So a book that can do that, like that's really successful. 3, again, I love themes of power and how power dynamics work. That's just something I'm very interested in. I loved the different timelines. It reminded me of Middle Game, one of my favorite books of all time, and how there was like this kind of countdown happening and we were jumping between a couple different things, and there was this big moment and the tension leading up to it was amazing. And then we would go like back in the day to when they first met, and I love a book that keeps my attention in that way. And then I loved the twists that it had in it. There were a lot of things that I didn't see coming at all, and the fact that this book has been out for so long, and I know that there's so much like artwork out about it, and like there are such huge fans of this book who are constantly talking about it. Like I'm pretty impressed that I've gone this long without being spoiled for it. So everything that happened in this book, like from the ending to like the little twists to, I was shocked by absolutely everything. And this isn't a type of story I feel like I've ever read before, so it was a good time. Next up is another kind of fantastical book. It's called Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. I read their first book. My first experience with them was The Death of Vivek Oji in January. This one I read in February, and then in March I just picked up Freshwater, which I'm very excited about. And in this story we're following Jam, who exists in a world where there were monsters, but all of the monsters are now gone, or say like that's what all the adults in her life say, because they know a world where these like monsters existed, but that there's like angel stuff going on and now there are no monsters. But then Jam meets somebody, a creature named Pet, and it makes her question a lot of things. This book is super short, so I don't want to spoil anything. So my 4 stars are as follows. 1, I think it was laid out really well, and the world building was great for like the size of book it was. I feel like I got a good idea of where we were. It wasn't over explained. 2, we have a fantastic lead character. I adore Jam. I feel like I would read an entire series following Jam. I would love to see Jam 30 years from now. She's a really great, strong lead character to follow, really enjoyable. She's Black and trans and uses sign language throughout the book, so I just loved how her life experience got described and how it informs like the choices that she makes. 3, while this deals with some really dark topics, I think that it's kind of it was a safer reading experience in regards to every character was like making the right choices. And if there was an opportunity for like the fallout of a friendship or a friendship to thrive, it went the right direction. If there was a moment to call out something bad happening, that happened. I feel like once a couple scenarios happen, you feel a little less tension knowing that knowing that you can trust what the author is going to do with this story. Which brings me to the relationships. There were so many important relationships in this book, and the way that they were described, and they were so soft and loving and important. That was just like such a great dynamic of it. And I don't actually have a reason for this not getting 5 stars. I want to find a negative, but I don't feel like I have a really strong feeling. It just wasn't a perfect book for me, and I don't know if that means like it should have been longer, or it should have had this other element introduced, or maybe I just can't fully enjoy a book to like my fullest potential if it involves like angels and monsters and that type of thing. And then lastly, I read this short poetry collection called Inflow with Grace by Raul James, and This is a former teacher of mine, and I picked up this book from like my local indie bookstore, so I'm not sure if it's available broadly. And I think you can tell it's kind of self-published. Every poem has like a number, so it's like 17 out of 30. But then at the end, it does have all of the titles of the poems. And I wonder if that was just like missed, like if those were supposed to be added, or if you're not supposed to know the titles of the poems until the end, but I can't imagine why. I gave this 4 stars, but I think it could be 5 stars if I got to listen to it. I think this is very, I don't know much about poetry, so like, I don't know what I'm saying, but I think that this read like slam poetry, like with the exclamation marks and the, I just think it would have been more impactful if it was performed as opposed to just me reading the words. Poetry often doesn't get a full 5 star from me anyway, because like my brain just rarely processes it in the way it's probably intended. But he says at the beginning that it is about uplifting our human consciousness. So it does cover a lot of things throughout here, like ego and wildness and friendship and love and connection and parenthood. And I think his experience being born in Trinidad and Tobago definitely inspired a lot of the ideas in here. And there's a lot of like concepts in here that I've gotten to hear from him throughout various classes, which is super cool. I know him as like a life coach, so I would love to pick up something from him that had some structure to it in that sense, that was full of inspiration in more paragraph form. But I think you can definitely get something out of it in this form. My favorite poem was 20 out of 30, which is about death and reflecting on your life. There's themes of like happiness and appreciating what you have in here and hope. And I just think it was a really, really fun read. So those are the 11 things that I read in February. Those are the 11 things I completed in February. As usual, is a month that gets away from me, and I'd love to hear what you thought of any of these books if you've read them, or you have like different opinions. You're always welcome to share down below if you're planning on picking any of these up, or if I've swayed you away from them, like anything. I'll chat with you down there, and I'll see you later. Bye.